David told you a little bit about me. I'm a partner at Bingham Greenbaum Dahl, a firm here in Indianapolis. So I've been doing this about 35 years. Yes, I'm old. But I spent 13 years as a full-time city and county attorney in Marion County. But don't let that frighten you. I'm originally from Jennings County, which I'm proud of, and so that's really my roots. And so I've got both big county and small county in me. But I have been on your side. I've had to worry about taxpayer budgets and all that, so I'm not just the city lawyer that you might think. I'm also very old school. Not only am I old, but I'm old school. You'll notice there's no PowerPoint. I don't know if most of your speakers have had one, but I tend to have more problems with them than I do success. Plus, I thought it was going to be the last session. I didn't want to turn the lights down. I was afraid I might lose all of you. I also don't have any handouts. I thought about that, and honestly, I would just about have to hand you Title V and Title 36 from the Indiana Code for you to carry home. This is an area that is so complex. Sounds simple, but it's really not. There are more probably exceptions than there are rules with respect to public purchasing, so no handouts either. Sorry. I'd rather just have you contact your county attorney when you have questions about it. I will leave my contact information, and I'm happy to answer questions for you, but you really do need to work with your county attorney. So this is a huge area to cover in half an hour, and we're going to try to do it in even less than half an hour now. So we're just really going to hit the highlights. I'm just going to say a few things so that if you're a newly elected officials and you hear something like that, it might perk your ears up so that you know you need to find out something more about it. But basically, you just can't go to the store like you do as a private citizen. If you need something, you just can't go buy it, 9 times out of 10. But again, there are exceptions. There are sometimes you can go open market. The first question you need to decide is, what is it you're buying? Sounds simple. But there are different rules for buying supplies and goods, materials like pencils. If you're buying pencils or copy paper, something like that, there's certain rules that apply to supplies. There's different rules that apply to construction. So if you're building a jail, putting up a fence, building a road, there's different rules that apply to that when you're purchasing those things. And even different rules for services. If you're hiring a lawyer, different rules that apply for that. Your second question is, who is the purchasing agent? And I'll get to that a little bit later. But I'm going to tackle the easiest area first, and that's the purchase of services. It's kind of what you would expect, but services are defined as the furnishing of labor, time, or effort by a person not involving the delivery of specific supplies or other printed documents or other items that are merely incidental to the required performance. So, if you hire a lawyer, we don't really produce anything. That's why most people don't like us. I think we're pretty worthless. We don't really do anything. The only thing we have to sell is our knowledge and our time. We might produce some paper, and that's kind of incidental to the service. So that's how I can best describe that to you. In the case of purchasing services, in most counties, you can use any procedure that's considered appropriate. But you need to check and see what your county's procedure is. As I said, I'm old. We used to have the purchasing statutes in with the local government statutes, which are what lawyers refer to as Title 36. 10 years or so ago, the legislature came in, as they often do, and revamped everything and moved everything into Title V. And at that time, they created new laws that said you have to have a purchasing agency and a purchasing agent. That doesn't mean you need a separate department, but your unit, in your case counties, at that time had to decide who was the purchasing agent for the county. So you need to consider, and then they adopted procedures for how they were going to do things. So you need to find out from your county, what are your procedures for purchasing services? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be just open market when it comes to services. But some counties did adopt rules and procedures and require requests for proposals or interviews, something like that. So just before you get ready to purchase services, even if you are a purchasing agent, then you need to check and see what's specific to your county. Probably the most complicated, so we've got services out of the way. That's the easy one. Probably the most complicated is public construction. A lot of you in this room may not be dealing with that. I understand I've got a lot of clerks and recorders. Is that the case? So you probably aren't going to be building a lot of things, but I might have some other folks. I don't know if I have any commissioners or council members or anybody that, so I'm going to just touch on this briefly as well. But we could spend a week on public construction. It's the most complicated. And I cannot stress enough on this one, consult your county attorney. It's very complicated, but a public work for public construction is defined as the construction, reconstruction, alteration, or renovation of a public building, airport facility, or other structure that is paid for out of a public fund or out of a special assessment. The term includes the construction, alteration, or repair of a highway, street, alley, bridge, sewer, drain, or other improvement, it's always a catchphrase, that is paid for out of a public fund or out of a special assessment. The term also includes any public work leased by a political subdivision under a lease containing an option to purchase. So it's about anything that you take a hammer and nail to is going to be considered a public work or public construction. Again, remember, as I told you in the beginning, there's lots of exceptions, though. One of those is if the project is less than $100,000, you can purchase the materials under the purchasing statute for materials, the supplies like the pencils that I mentioned, and build it with your own workforce. So, if your county's going to probably not repave, but repair a road, they can do it with their own highway department. They can purchase the materials under the regular purchasing statutes, and you don't have to worry about the public construction statutes. But for public construction, if the project is at least $150,000, and you're not going to do the $100,000 with your own workforce, you must publicly bid the project. And those bids are awarded to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder. If you don't award it to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder, then you have to justify that and keep a record of your justification. So this is where, these big projects, this is where people get upset if they had the low bid, it's not awarded to them. You have to be very careful what your justification is and the records that you keep, or you're maybe looking at a lawsuit from one of the bidders. The factors to consider in determining whether or not a bidder is responsive are whether they meet the specifications, whether they comply with the instructions in the bid, and whether they comply with all the statutes, ordinances, and rules. That's for responsiveness. So they're responsive to your bid if they comply with those things. But then you have factors in determining whether or not the bidder is responsible. And that can involve their ability and capacity to perform the work, their integrity, character, and reputation, and their competence and experience. So in this area, you must be very, very careful because you're dealing with the company's reputation. So if you've heard rumors, they've done work in another county, you've heard bad things, you need to have some proof of that in order to declare them not responsible. Not being responsible goes to their reputation. And you don't want to tarnish that. I mean, just because they may be from the next county and you've got a bidder from your county, that's not a good enough reason. You have to have some reason that you know based upon their experience or their reputation to declare them not responsible. You have the option to reject all the bids in a bidding situation. And one thing that's important for counties, for sand, gravel, asphalt paving materials, and crushed stone, you can award more than one. And you can award them geographically. That's one thing that's different for counties. We're still talking about public construction. So if the project is between $50,000, and $150,000, then you can just solicit 3 quotes. You don't have to go through the whole bidding process with plans and specifications and all the detail, the notices. You can do it with 3 quotes, but you still have to award it to the lowest responsible and responsive quoter in that case. Under very limited circumstances, you can go open market on a project that size. But again, check with your county attorney. You cannot divide a project to make it smaller in order to fit within the quoting process as opposed to the bidding process. There's a specific statute that states if contiguous sections of a road, street, or bridge are to be resurfaced in a calendar year, all of the work shall be considered to compromise a single public work project. So you can't divide it up by a mile here, and then the next mile is a separate project in order to get around the bidding process. With public works projects, you have to be concerned about the common construction wage. And there's another whole process that a committee must be established, and they have to determine what the wage is for that project, for the different skilled services. Certain projects, and most within this range, have to have plans and specifications that are approved by a licensed engineer or architect. You may be required to have a performance bond, a payment bond, and keep retainage. Again, all these things depend upon the size of your project. So work with your attorney and your engineer if you get involved with a project in this size. Said there are special provisions and of more interest to counties than some other units with respect to road, street, and bridge work. Then we have some other alternatives that are becoming more and more popular because of the bidding process is so cumbersome. Now we've got a lot of communities that want to do projects by means of a design build. There are statutes which allow that, which means the same company can design it and build it. It's a way to, I don't want to say avoid or get around the bidding statute, but it's another alternative to the traditional bidding. We have guaranteed savings contracts if you have an energy project. This is a way that you don't have to involve the bidding process. If you have, say, the courthouse, you're going to install some energy savings equipment, new HVAC system, new windows, something like that. You can do it by way of an energy savings contract and go with just one vendor for that. We have what's called BOT, Build, Operate, Transfer. That's the process currently being used. I don't know if any of you have read about Marion County's looking at a new justice center, and that's being done through a Build, Operate, Transfer, so that the same vendor comes in, says, we'll build it, we'll finance it, we'll operate it. When it's all paid for, we'll transfer it to you. So there's special statutes for that. Now, if your project is less than $150,000, remember we talked about the $100,000 projects that you can do with your own workforce. If it's less than $150,000 and it is routine operation, routine repair, or routine maintenance of existing structures, then again, rather than using the public construction law, you can go under the regular public purchasing law, which is what would normally be used for supplies. That's why I said in the beginning, it's a very tangled web. There's more exceptions to things than there are rules, it seems. So we're going to leave public construction. I've already confused you enough, I think, with that one. We're going to go to supplies. And again, you first have to determine who is the purchasing agent for your county. In some counties, the county commissioners just said that we're going to be the purchasing agent for everyone. I would say in most counties, they named all the elected officials could be the purchasing agent for their own offices. But double check just to make sure before you go out trying to purchase something. When the legislature made these changes in the statute, they started out by saying all purchasing agents must act in good faith. I love it. Like you wouldn't. I mean, you were elected to do what's good for the county. You were elected because you wanted to serve. But our friends at the legislature are always suspicious of us. So they start out the whole process by saying the purchasing agents must act in good faith. So when you're purchasing supplies, again, you may have to do competitive bidding. If your purchase is over $150,000, now that's going to be a heck of a lot of pencils. If you're going through that many pencils, I think there might be a problem. But if you're purchasing something that is over $150,000, you again have to do competitive bidding. And your invitation for bids, even though it's not construction, must include specifications, contract terms, evaluation criteria, and when the bid opening will be, and when whether or not you're willing to discuss the bid, the specs. So this is why I keep saying over and over, and I know I sound like a broken record, but you really need to involve your county attorney on anything that's very sizable. You're no longer required to read bid prices out loud, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. I've been to several county commissioner meetings where the whole audience will be filled with just bidders sitting there waiting for the commissioners to open the bids, and the commissioners read the bid amount, who it's from, the bid amount, and hand it off to be reviewed. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that process, and it's been done that way for years. But you don't have to read them out loud. It does still have to be done in public, but that public can consist of only one other person. I don't know that anybody's really made this big change, but that was one of the changes the legislature made. You have to maintain the bid information, and it is open for public inspection after the award of the contract. So you open the bids, may or may not read them out loud. You got bidders coming up and saying, well, I want to see so-and-so's bid. No, you don't have to release that until after the award of the contract. You have the same factors when you have a bid for supplies as you did with construction with respect to whether or not they're responsible and whether or not they're responsive. So again, whether or not they met your specifications and whether or not you have evidence that they can or cannot provide the supplies. With respect to public purchasing of supplies and materials, there's a provision for what we call small purchases. Not everybody's going to be buying things at the level of $150,000, hopefully. So between $50,000 and $150,000, you can do it again by getting 3 quotes. This is another reason I didn't give you a handout. These levels I keep spouting, the 50,000, 150,000, 100,000 here, they change. The legislature changes them on us every now and then. So you need to know what's current, again, through your county attorney, because if I had given you something and then this session they decide to change it and you go back to that, you're already going to have outdated material. So these levels I keep spouting off, you don't have to remember them today, but just know they are out there. The different levels invoke different rules. If your purchase is below $50,000, which most of yours may be, again, you have to see what your local rules are. What was adopted back when they established the purchasing agents? It's probably either going to be open market. They've just said, go get whatever you need. Find the best price you can. Or they may have said, no, we're going to take quotes for everything. So just double check, see what applies to your county. Again, there are alternatives. If you don't feel the bid, if your project or your supply order falls within this level, but you don't feel that's really going to work for you, you can do a request for proposal, but you must make a finding that it's not practical or advantageous for you to do it through the quote process. This comes up often with respect to computer systems. Sometimes they are so unique to a particular county that they handle it through an RFP. The RFP does allow you to do more negotiation, and it doesn't have to go to the lowest quoter or bidder in that case. I know I've already bored you, but if you have questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. There are several special purchasing methods. Again, we're back to lots of exceptions. These are found again, most of them are in If you want a code site, it's IC 5-22-10. The first one is with respect to emergencies. If you have a threat to public health, safety, or welfare, go get it fixed. Go get it taken care of. Go get it purchased. But it has to be a true emergency. My favorite example when I was with the city of Indianapolis was one of the golf pros decided he had an emergency because he needed new carpeting in the pro shop before the season started. Now, I really don't think that's a threat to public health, safety, or welfare, and it's obviously something he should have known at the end of the previous season, whether or not he was going to need new carpeting. So that was not a true emergency. Second one is a unique opportunity for substantial savings. A unique opportunity might be, again, back to our pencils. Maybe somebody's having a closeout on pencils. So it's a one-shot opportunity. They're going out of business. Those are unique opportunities. A unique opportunity is not, my brother-in-law's in the pencil business. Okay. Auctions. Auctions are another avenue you might be able to choose. And we now have online reverse auctions, which is a whole nother gamut. If you're buying equipment, a lot of times heavy equipment is purchased by that method. Sole source, but it truly needs to be sole source. For example, if the county has a John Deere tractor, they're probably going to need John Deere parts for that tractor. They probably can't go buy other kinds of parts, so that would be a sole source. Data processing contracts or license agreements are now can be done by special purchasing method. Whether or not something is compatible with your system, again, back to computers or equipment, a lot of times you have to have something compatible. It's a lot like sole source. You can purchase off of state or federal contracts. Automobiles are often purchased off of the state, what we call QPA. Police cars, sheriff's cars. There's always a little tension about that because you want to shop local, so your local dealers don't appreciate that. But it can also be used to your advantage to leverage some pricing. If you have done a solicitation by bidding or quoting and got no responses, then you can use an alternative method and go usually open market. There are others. David's already looking at me, so I'm going to try to talk faster. Again, just have your county attorney check the statute, see if you might have some quirky situation that has a special method. There are certain restrictions on purchasing, and by those I mean there's certain things they want us to purchase from the Department of Corrections, from the rehabilitation centers. I'm going to kind of skip over that in the interest of time this evening. There's an Indiana business, what I call sort of preference, if you happen to be on a border county. Our preference is that if another state discriminates against Indiana, the governing body may establish rules to discriminate to some extent against that state. Yeah, what is right? So if you're on the border and let's say Illinois discriminates against Indiana and says, no, we're going to give a preference to Illinois vendors, then your county can say, well, okay, we're going to establish rules and we're going to give a preference to Indiana vendors over Illinois. It's pretty rare, but it does exist. There are certain made in the USA requirements. Some are mandatory. The governing body must adopt a rule for this preference. There are some written exceptions. For example, if it's not manufactured in the United States, you don't have to buy it. We can't. If it's too expensive, if it's less quality, or the catch-all, if it's not in the public interest, then you don't have to abide by the mandatory preference for made in the USA. There are special provisions for steel, U.S. Steel, and if you've had any federal contracts, you'd be aware of that. They're very much sticklers on that. And there's also a preference for Indiana coal. There are some other optional preferences. Contracts. You can have multiple year contracts. For supplies, it can be up to 4 years, so you don't have to go through this every year. But you still must have an appropriation. or sufficient fund balance for the first year to have a valid contract. So when you do your 4-year contracts, you need the escape clause that all of us should have in our contracts anyway, that if there is not sufficient funding, you can terminate the contract. It's a standard provision that are in almost all government contracts. You can have a 4-year contract with a price escalation. And you can have unlimited renewals for the same term if there's no price escalation. But all those have to be put in the beginning. You can have incentives for early performance. I'm sure you've seen some of these on some of the state highway projects. If you have a road project, you can have an incentive for early performance. And you can have penalties for late performance. That bridge that hasn't gotten open for 4 months late, you can have a penalty for that if it was in your original agreement. Again, I mentioned there are special provisions for petroleum products and paving materials, if we have any road folks in here. We have public and private agreements, which I referred to some of those earlier, the BOT, the design build. They're more similar to public works projects. So the two things I want you to leave with today. What are you purchasing? Figure out, is it a service? Is it construction? Or public work? Or is it supplies and materials? And number 2, consult your county attorney. I will have some of my cards in the back if anybody wants my contact information. I know Jackie wants to get started, so if there are any questions, clear as mud, right? Okay. Thank you.